what is the lending criteria? A very, very difficult question to answer. There is no cookie cutter approach when it comes to financing a vehicle.
Burning questions.
Insightful answers.
Listener's choice.
With Clement Manyathela.
Some of whom have been painful stories. Some of which. Mlume. Slungu. Yeah, that's English. It gets to you. All right, it's time for our Listener's Choice feature. And this feature is all about you as our listener, the listener of the CM show. So you help us, you curate the show with us. You send us an email on cm@702.co.za. And then what we do is we bring in an expert to talk about whatever suggestion you've made on the email. So sometimes you say to us, talk about this, bring in a listener to talk about this and that, and then we do it, right? So today, I'm going to read an email that we got from Stelo Shope. And then we're going to talk about buying your first car. Here's an email from Stelo. Hi, Clement and team. I'm currently in the market to purchase my first car ever. Congratulations, Stelo. I really am happy for you. I know it's always exciting to buy your first car. I do understand that your credit profile plays a huge role in getting approval for finance from the bank. I have a few questions about this. I've heard of a lending criteria that lenders would use to assess the credit and customer affordability. How is this determined? Preferably, what is the minimum score that I need to have to begin the process of negotiating with the bank? And is it much better to do the application directly with the bank or let the dealer do it themselves? Do I stand a chance to negotiate better if I'm doing it directly with my bank? Regards, Stelo Shope. Stelo, thank you so much for your email. And really, buying a car can really be a daunting prospect for many newcomers, because you've got the combination of a huge choice in the market. There's a large financial commitment. There's complex financial terms that can intimidate you as a first-time buyer. So it turns that exciting occasions into a stressful nightmare sometimes. So we've invited George Mienie, who is the CEO of AutoTrader, to guide us through this discussion and help us answer some of the questions people may have about buying their first car. So George is the CEO of AutoTrader. He's here in his personal capacity, leveraging his many years in the industry to give us this independent view and consumer-friendly advice of what to do when you're considering buying a car on finance. He's not a licensed financial advisor, so don't call him to ask about advice in terms of your finances, about how to approach the journey of buying a new car. But any other question that you may have, he's very well experienced to talk to us and answer some of your questions that you may have around buying your first car. George, thank you so much for your time and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Clement. Very good to talk to you, and a very interesting email that you received.
Yeah. So let's talk about maybe the do's and don'ts first. When you're financing your car, what are the considerations? What are the do's and don'ts?
Well, Clement, first of all, congratulations on you wanting to purchase a new car or your first car. Yes, as Clement said, it's daunting, but don't be put off by anything we're going to discuss now. It's really just the world of economics and how things work. So please don't be put off. Go ahead and buy that passionate car that you want to drive and get your independence. But to answer your question, Clement, the do's and don'ts are quite simple, and I think pretty common sense. If you think about buying a car and financing it, the overarching thing to think about is don't binge financially. I know that a car is an emotional purchase, and oftentimes people want to keep up with the Joneses. Try and not buy things to keep other people happy. Buy things to keep yourself happy.
Yeah.
So that's the first don't. Don't buy it because your neighbor or your friend or your XYZ is driving a particular brand, because you're going to get yourself into potentially a tight squeeze. The second thing is try and keep the finance of the vehicle below the vehicle's sellable value. A very difficult thing to get your head around, I think, initially. But if you apply your mind, I think you could get your head around it. And what I mean by that is try and avoid things like balloon payments. Try and avoid very, very long finance periods. Oftentimes people try and go for very long finance periods because it brings the monthly payment down, which is not a bad thing in the right vehicle. But if you extend the finance period for just too long, you might just find that the car depreciates faster than the finance gets paid down. And it specifically happens with things like the payments or, whether there's that big payment right at the end. So just be very aware of when financing a vehicle, the equity of the vehicle or the value of the vehicle will depreciate over time, and try and keep the finance value in line with that, so that if ever you have to sell the car, you're not in a situation where you owe more money to the bank than what you could sell the car.
Please explain more about the balloon payment, George. What actually happens, and is it advisable for people considering buying cars to go for that?
There is a place for balloon payments, Clement, so I'm not going to say don't do it. There is definitely a place for balloon payments, but it's not for every single consumer. It's not for every single car. So what happens with the balloon payments is, let's say you finance a car for 100,000 Rand today, and let's, for argument's sake, say the payments are 3,000 Rand a month. Based on interest rates and your credits and all that stuff. The final payment is bigger than the 3,000 Rand. So you might set a final payment at, let's say, 20% of the value of the finance, which may be 20,000 Rand of the 100,000 Rand. So 20,000 Rand is left to the end to pay. The downside of that is, first of all, you're paying interest on a higher amount every single month because you're not paying the loan down as fast as what you would be if you didn't have that global or balloon payment right at the end. So it really is trying to back-end, the balloon payment is trying to back-end the final payment towards the latter part of the loan.
So one of the things that Stella was asking about is, the lending criteria, what is the minimum score that someone needs to get, and is it advisable to apply directly for finance with the bank, or let the dealer be the one that actually do it? What are the benefits there?
So if we address the first part of the question, Clement, and that is, what is the lending criteria? A very, very difficult question to answer. There is no cookie-cutter approach when it comes to financing a vehicle. All of our banks in the country have different risk appetites. We must be cognizant of the fact that these are businesses in their own right, and their part of their business objective is to lend money to consumers or to businesses, and they have different risk profiles. So just because one has a particular credit profile doesn't mean that you will get the same finance deal today or potentially the same finance deal in 3 months' time. That is why the bank quite oftentimes says that this particular offer for finance is valid for 7 days, and then they have to rescore you because it's based on your credit score, your financial affordability, as well as the bank's risk appetite or the amount of money that the bank wants to lend out to the market. And that changes from time to time, depending on the economics of the country, depending on the economics of the bank. So it's not a cookie cutter. You can't say that there is a particular thing that you can point to. If I have this credit profile, I will get this kind of finance. By and large, it's very loose.
Let's talk about budget. George, because sometimes when you're buying a car you sometimes you look at, I've got this 5,000 disposable amount of money. How about I just dedicate that it can be my installment for my car, but sometimes there are, costs that are associated with that. How important is it to pause and really do a proper budget, look at your finances before you decide to buy a car? Because sometimes you get a job and you are excited about it, or you get an increase at work, you've got 2,000 more, and you think, that can help in supplementing what I already had to get a car, but you haven't really factored in the other, costs that are going to come in maintaining that car.
So what you're referring to there, Clement, is the total cost of ownership of a car. Finance is only one part of the cost of ownership of a vehicle. The other costs are things like insurance, repair costs, maintenance costs, tires, those kinds of costs. Oftentimes people don't factor in, and it's a wise thing to do to take a view on an annual basis of a car. So what do tires cost for this car, and how often do I think I need to replace those tires? And then if I annualize that, what is that on an average month? What would that cost me? Factor that into the cost of the car on a monthly basis. So total cost of ownership is definitely a factor that is not only contained finance payment of a car. If you're at the edge of what you can afford from a finance point of view, already getting yourself into trouble because you're not considering the other costs that are involved in running that motor vehicle. Cost of fuel. Some cars are more expensive on fuel than others. Diesel versus petrol. Those kinds of things. But Clelo's second question is quite an interesting one for me, in that it says preferably what is the minimum score that I would have to begin the process and negotiate, or should I negotiate directly with the bank? Negotiating directly with your bank won't necessarily get you the best finance deal. And the reason is because the dealer has a relationship with the bank. The car dealer has a relationship with the bank, and the better the car dealer's relationship with the bank, the better finance deal that dealership can get you. So don't discount the fact that in 9 times out of 10, maybe you can if you're an individual, but I don't believe, I've never seen, and if it exists, I'd like somebody to tell me, I've never seen a private banker or a bank beat a dealership when it comes to finance, and it's purely because the dealers are in the business of arranging finance every single day.
And they're talking to different banks as well, right?
Exactly. The other thing to take into consideration is different banks have different appetites for either used or new cars. So what I would encourage is try and get a finance a deal on the table from multiple sources so that you can see which one is best for you. And then Taylor also speaks about credit score. The banks score you from 1 to 7, 8, 9, 10. 1 being the best type of score, and 9, 10 being the worst type of score. If you're a 1 to 3 consumer, if you're in that category of 1 to 3, oftentimes your credit is approved automatically. There's no human involved. But if you are a score that is maybe a 4, 5, or a 6, then humans often get involved in trying to argue for you, particularly the dealership. And this is where going to your bank directly doesn't often work, is because if you're a borderline case to getting finance, and there's something that happened in your past that you could potentially explain that, this was a once-off event, you got yourself into a bit of trouble, and it no longer exists, the dealer is in a very, very good position to go to the bank and say to the business development person, to say, listen here, this consumer has this circumstance around that issue that you are declining them on. Please, can you reconsider? And oftentimes that happens. The bank reconsiders based on the dealer's inputs, and the finance deal is then approved.
Okay, look, George, I've got some messages coming through from our listeners, some questions they have. I also want you to give us some advice on what model do you go for? Is it better to buy new or pre-owned demo cars? And also, what are the kind of questions you should be asking the dealership when looking to buy a car? There's an SMS here from someone who seems to have been done bad by some salespeople. Says, Clement, the other dynamic that makes buying a car so daunting is dealing with car salesmen and women. They're terrible, terrible. Apparently, there's a special place in hell for lawyers and car salespeople from Age. Age, what have they done to you? Please send a voice note or send a text explaining what happened, or give us a call to hear why you're so frustrated by them. After the break, I'll take your calls for questions you have to George that you want to put to George, but also your advice on what you did, what your approach was, and maybe you can share even some of the mistakes you made and that other people must avoid when buying their first cars. It's 22 after 11.
Breakfast with Bongani Bengwa.
Your morning fix of current events
Developing stories.
and a whole lot more.
We share information, not because we have it.
But because it matters to you, we give a platform not just to newsmakers, but to you.
Who are directly affected by what's happening in the news.
We'll expand your worldview, but bring you closer to who you really are.
Empowered, confident.
Ready for those conversations around the water cooler.
Breakfast with Bongani Bengwa, 6 to 9 a.m.
Only on 702. Let's walk the talk.
Some people don't like too many questions, but what if those questions could save you money on your car insurance every month? Like, do you work from home, or do you only use your car on weekends? The fact is, OutSurance could save you more money if you drive less. So give them a try. SMS out to 38350. That's out to 38350. OutSurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's apply. The SMSs are free.
Our Easter deals are now on at Pick n Pay. Save 20% when you buy any two 325 gram to 1 kilo Rainbow Simply Chicken Viennas, cheese grillers or frankfurters and swipe. And buy P&P tenderized beef steak for R84.99 per kilo. Make sure you shop smart this Easter. One day only, 30 March, while stocks last. T's and C's apply. Only at Pick n Pay.
Critical turning point in South African history. The way forward isn't rhetoric, it's skills. Only the best business school can give you the best skills. Henley is ranked by the Financial Times as one of the top 1% of business schools in the world. And we're here in South Africa. You need a top international MBA for an international future. Go to henleysa.ac.za. We build a people who build the businesses that build Africa.
Burning questions.
Insightful answers
Listener's choice.
with Clement Manyathela.
24 minutes after 11 o'clock. And yes, for our listener's choice today, we're talking about buying your first ever car. What are the do's and don'ts? George Mienie is the CEO of AutoTrader. George, I've got some messages that are coming through here and some calls as well. Before I get to them, maybe tell us about the new and pre-owned cars. Sometimes people say, brand new cars, that's not something that you must really always obsess about, because when you look at demo cars, you can get a similar car that's probably been driven for about 1,000 or 10,000 kilometers at a much lower price. But if you buy it brand new, it's incredibly expensive. It's the biggest scam, they would say. What's your advice?
Well, Clement, I think, first of all, on a new versus used basis, the reality of the situation is twofold. One, at the moment in our current environment, being in 2020 and the financial, situation that we all find ourselves in, people have opted for used cars much more over the last year than they've opted for new. That has been the case for many, many years, not only in our market, but in many markets around the world. As a matter of fact, the retail sales of used cars dwarfs those retail sales of new cars every single month by a factor of about 2 to 2.5 times in our market, the American market, the UK market, and many other markets around the world. So used car is a very big business. So it all depends on what the consumer wants. If you like that new car smell and you can afford it, it's a good idea to buy a brand new car. There's no history, there's no potential bad treatment of that car, and you can drive it off the showroom floor with peace of mind. When it comes to a used car, however, there is a very small segment of the market where you have to watch out, because potentially that car has been in an accident, potentially it's been abused. But therein lies the benefit for the consumer is, yes, you can get it for a better price, and you can probably get a better spec car for the same price as what you buy a new one. time. However, you've got to do your homework. If you don't do your homework, you could potentially be burnt by that very small number of used cars out there. But the vast majority of used cars by reputable dealers have been checked out, and the dealer's not there to do you in. Remember, the dealer has a reputation to uphold as well. So therefore, it's not in their interest to sell you a lemon. You've just got to do your homework on the car and on the dealership. Oftentimes people forget about doing their homework on the dealership. Go and check out the reputation that dealer has on social media. It's very easy to do today.
Absolutely. All right, let's play a voice note that's come on 0727021702.
Hi, Clement and 702 listeners. Just a question for your guests. If you intend to buy a car cash, let's just say top of the range vehicle cash, do you get any certain percentage of a discount? Can you negotiate for a discount?
All right, thank you for that question. Yes, George?
Well, Clement, that's a very interesting question and often comes up. Consumers are of the misconception that when you walk into a car dealership, that cash is going to get a bigger discount. I'm here to buy the car. I've got cash. I want a discount. Unfortunately, that isn't the case. And the reason for that is because a dealership is a business that earns its money making a profit on cars. I mean, we've all got to accept that. They're a business that makes profit on cars. Those margins are smaller and smaller as time goes on. The dealerships don't make big margins on cars. Another source of the dealership's income is they get a commission on the bank finance. So therefore, it is in the interest of the dealership to offer finance to the consumer. So therefore, cash doesn't actually play to the dealership's benefit. And therefore, it's not likely that cash will get that consumer a discount.
So one thing that I've experienced before, George, is when you buy a car and you get a really good interest rate, and then you tell maybe the financial advisor or your accountant that, look, I want to put in this deposit. And your banker says, no, don't put in this big deposit because it's going to affect your the interest rate. I mean, is that a thing? And I know this is more finance related, but I just thought it's quite interesting that if you've got a big deposit to put in, you're actually advised not to do that because otherwise it's going to really mess up with the good interest rate that the banker negotiated for you.
So yes, everything you do within the finance deal, Clement, is going to affect the deal itself.
Okay.
If you put a big deposit in up front, the bank's going to look at your risk profile differently. Remember that the bank also earns money off. The higher the debt, the more money the bank makes. So therefore, the higher the debt, the better interest potentially the bank might be able to offer you. So my advice to that consumer, and again, I'm not a financial services advisor, so take this as a layman's comment, is get the finance a deal approved, and then just pay down the bigger amount that you want to pay down later on in the deal, and then you can bring your debt down in that way.
I see. Thank you so much for answering that, George. All right, it's 11:30. We're going to go to news now, but George, thank you so much. Oh, time flies. I'm thinking I still have another 30 minutes with you. Thank you, George. Thank you for coming through and managing to also answer some of the questions from our listeners. George Mienie is the CEO of AutoTrader.